The blood-red sun beat down mercilessly on Olivia Garrett as she stumbled across the parched prairie, her once white dress torn and smudged with dirt, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had been running for what seemed like forever, her legs burning with exhaustion, her lungs on fire. But she couldn't stop. Not with the echoes of gunshots still ringing in her ears, not with the memory of her father's lifeless body sprawled across the porch of their homestead, not with the knowledge that Tucker's men would be coming after her. They'd already taken everything else. They wouldn't hesitate to take her life too. It was 1873 in the Western Territories, and justice was as scarce as water in the drought-stricken land outside Douglas, Arizona. The railroad was coming, bringing with it men hungry for land, for gold, for power. Men like Jonas Tucker, who had decided her father's modest ranch stood in the way of his ambitions. When the silhouette of a small cabin appeared on the horizon, Olivia nearly wept with relief. Her knees buckled beneath her as she staggered the final few yards toward the weathered structure. The sound of her fist against the wooden door seemed impossibly faint compared to the thundering of her heart. The door swung open suddenly, revealing the tall, broad-shouldered frame of a man backlit by the warm glow from inside. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, widened as they took in her appearance. "Please," Olivia whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. "They killed my father, they're coming for me." Then the world tilted, darkness creeping in from the edges of her vision, and she pitched forward into the arms of a stranger. Ethan Sawyer had seen his fair share of trouble in his 30 years, but finding a half-dead woman collapsed on his doorstep was a new one. He carried her inside, noticing the ugly purplish bruise blooming across her left cheekbone and the dried blood at the corner of her split lip. Her face was a mess from whatever or whoever she'd been running from. He laid her gently on his bed, quickly fetching water and clean cloths. As he dabbed at the dirt and blood on her face, her eyelids fluttered open. She flinched away from his touch, fear flashing across her features. "Easy now," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "You're safe here." The woman tried to sit up, panic evident in her wide hazel eyes. "They'll come looking. I need to go, you need to rest," Ethan interrupted firmly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've got cuts and bruises all over. Your face is bruised from running." He dipped the cloth back in the water. "You'll heal where no one can touch you, I promise you that." Her eyes, filled with doubt and fear, searched his face. "You don't understand. These men, they killed my father. They'll kill you too if they find me here." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'd like to see them try." He set aside the cloth and stood up, his tall frame casting a shadow across the bed. "I'm Ethan Sawyer. This is my cabin, my land. Nobody comes here without my say-so." "Olivia," she whispered after a moment's hesitation. "Olivia Garrett." "Well, Miss Garrett, you're going to rest now. Tomorrow you can tell me more about these men and we'll figure out what to do." He moved toward the door. "I'll sleep by the fire. Call if you need anything." As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Ethan looked back at her, his expression unreadable. "Out here, Miss Garrett, sometimes all we have is the kindness of strangers." He closed the door behind him, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts. Despite her exhaustion, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind outside made her heart race with fear. But eventually, the steady sound of Ethan's breathing from the other room and the sheer weight of her fatigue pulled her under. When morning came, Olivia awoke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. The events of yesterday crashed back into her consciousness and grief hit her anew. Her father was gone. Their home was likely burned to the ground by now. She had nothing left. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted under the door and her stomach growled in response. She hadn't eaten since breakfast yesterday. Gingerly, she touched her face, wincing at the tenderness of her bruised cheek. Using the small mirror hanging on the wall, she assessed the damage. Her normally fair skin was marred by an ugly purple bruise and her lip was swollen where it had split. She looked like she'd been in a brawl. Smoothing down her filthy dress as best she could, Olivia opened the door and stepped into the main room of the cabin. Ethan stood at the stove, his back to her. In the daylight, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps early 30s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Morning," she said softly. He turned, a spatula in hand, and nodded. "Feeling any better?" "Yes, thank you." She touched her bruised cheek self-consciously. "I must look a fright," something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I've seen worse." He gestured to the table. "Sit, eat something." The meal was simple but delicious. Olivia hadn't realized how ravenous she was until she started eating. Between bites, she told Ethan everything about her father's small ranch, about Jonas Tucker's determination to acquire all the land along the planned railroad route, about the men who had come yesterday with their threats and then their guns. "I was in the barn when I heard the shots," she said, her voice growing hollow. "I saw them through the crack in the door. They shot my father in cold blood when he refused to sign over the deed. Then they started searching the house. I ran." Ethan's face had grown increasingly grim as she spoke. "Tucker," he said, the name like a curse on his lips. "I know of him. Half the territory is in his pocket already." "What am I going to do?" Olivia asked, desperation edging into her voice. "I can't go back. I can't go to town. His men will be watching. I have nowhere to go, no family left." "You'll stay here," Ethan said simply, as if it was the most obvious solution in the world. "Here?" Olivia echoed, looking around the small cabin. "But I can't impose. It's not an imposition," he cut her off. "My nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. Nobody comes out this far unless they're lost or looking for trouble. You'll be safe here until we figure out what to do about Tucker." The way he said, we caught her attention. "Why would you help me fight this battle? You don't even know me." Ethan's gray eyes darkened. "Let's just say Tucker and I have unfinished business." He stood, collecting their plates. "Rest today. Tomorrow I'll ride into town for supplies and to see what I can find out." True to his word, Ethan left at dawn the next day. Olivia spent the day exploring the small cabin and its surroundings. The place was simple but well built, with a small vegetable garden out back and a corral for Ethan's horses. Inside, she found books more than she would have expected for a solitary rancher living in the middle of nowhere. She was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues when Ethan returned. His expression was thunderous as he dismounted and tied up his horse. "They're saying you killed your father," he said without preamble. "Tucker's telling everyone you had a dispute over selling the ranch, that you shot him in anger and ran." Olivia felt as if she'd been struck. "That's a lie. They murdered him." "I know," Ethan said, his voice gentler now. "But Tucker's got the sheriff in his pocket, and there's a reward for information leading to your capture." Tears burned in Olivia's eyes. "So I'm to be hunted like an animal for a crime I didn't commit." Ethan sat beside her on the porch steps. "We'll clear your name, but we need to be smart about it. Tucker's powerful, but he's not invincible." He hesitated. "There's something else. I found out why he's so keen on your land specifically." "Why, word is, the railroad's planning a depot right where your property sits. That land is about to become very valuable indeed." Olivia's hands clenched into fists. "So my father died for Tucker's greed." "Men have died for less out here," Ethan said grimly. "But Tucker's going to pay for what he's done, I promise you that." Over the next week, a routine developed. Ethan taught Olivia how to use a rifle just in case, though he assured her no one would find them. She helped with chores around the cabin, cooking meals and tending the garden. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes reading in companionable silence. Olivia learned that Ethan had come to Arizona 5 years ago after serving in the war. He'd built the cabin with his own hands, preferring solitude to the chaos of town life. What he didn't tell her, but she began to suspect, was that he was running from something in his past that had driven him to this isolated existence. On the 8th day of her stay, Olivia was hanging laundry when she heard a horse approaching. Her heart leaped into her throat. Abandoning the washing, she raced for the cabin and the rifle Ethan kept by the door. But it was Ethan himself who rode into the clearing, another horse trailing behind him. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by confusion. "Whose horse is that?" she called as he dismounted. "Yours," Ethan replied, leading both animals to the water trough. "If you're going to stay here, you'll need a way to get around." Olivia approached the second horse, a pretty chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face. "She's beautiful," she said, reaching out to stroke the animal's neck. "But I can't accept such a gift." "Consider it a loan then," Ethan said with a shrug. "Besides, I got her cheap. Owner was desperate to sell." Olivia wasn't fooled for a moment, but she nodded. "Thank you." That afternoon, they rode together across Ethan's land. He showed her the boundaries of his property, the creek that provided water year-round, the stand of cottonwoods that offered shade in the punishing summer heat. Olivia felt a freedom she hadn't experienced in years. Since her mother's death when she was 16, she'd shouldered the responsibilities of keeping house for her father, with little time for herself. As they rested their horses beneath the cottonwoods, Olivia found herself studying Ethan's profile. He was a handsome man in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and a strength in his jaw that hinted at stubbornness. "Why did you really help me?" she asked suddenly. Ethan turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. "I told you, you said Tucker, and you have unfinished business," Olivia interrupted. "What did you mean?" For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, his gaze drifting to the horizon. 3 years ago, I had a partner, Tom Reynolds. We were going to start a cattle operation together, had land, had some stock, had plans." His voice grew harder. "Then Tucker decided he wanted our land for his own endeavors. Tom refused to sell." A chill ran down Olivia's spine. "What happened?" "Tom was found dead. Accident, they called it. Fell from his horse and broke his neck." Ethan's laugh was bitter. "Tom, who'd been riding since before he could walk." "You think Tucker had him killed?" Olivia said softly. "I know he did. Same as I know he had your father killed." Ethan's eyes, when they met hers, were filled with a cold anger. "But I couldn't prove it then, and I still can't prove it now. So I sold the land, I couldn't run it alone anyway, and I came out here, where Tucker's reach doesn't extend." Olivia understood now why he had taken her in without hesitation. They were bound by a common enemy, a shared grief. "I'm sorry about your friend," she said. Ethan nodded, accepting her sympathy. Then, as if needing to change the subject, he stood. "We should head back. It'll be dark soon." The next morning, Ethan announced he needed to ride to a neighboring ranch to help with a difficult calving. "I'll be back by nightfall," he promised, saddling his horse. "Keep the doors locked. Use the rifle if you need to." After he left, Olivia busied herself with chores. She swept the cabin, kneaded dough for bread, and mended a tear in one of Ethan's shirts. It struck her, as she worked the needle through the fabric, how quickly she had adapted to life in this cabin, how comfortable she felt in Ethan's space. The sound of approaching horses jerked her from her thoughts. Peering through the window, she saw 3 men riding toward the cabin. None of them was Ethan. Panic seized her. Had Tucker's men found her? She grabbed the rifle and checked that it was loaded just as Ethan had taught her. Then she positioned herself behind the door, heart pounding in her chest. A knock sounded, followed by a man's voice. "Hello, Sawyer, you home?" Olivia remained silent, hoping they would believe the cabin was empty and leave. "Probably out checking his stock," another voice said. "Let's wait, he shouldn't be long." The sound of boots on the porch, then the creak of the rocking chair as someone sat in it, told Olivia they weren't leaving. She stayed frozen in place, rifle clutched in sweaty hands, for what felt like hours. The sun was beginning to set when she heard Ethan's horse. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by renewed fear. What if these men were here to harm Ethan? She crept to the window and risked a glance outside. The 3 strangers had stood as Ethan rode up, and to her surprise, Ethan raised a hand in greeting. "Wilson Daniels Johnson," she heard him say as he dismounted. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Got word about a woman," one of the men Wilson presumably replied. Wanted for killing her father over in Douglas, $50 reward for information, thought you might have seen something being out this way. Olivia's blood ran cold. They were looking for her. Haven't seen anyone, Ethan said, his voice casual. Been pretty quiet out here, same as always. Mind if we look around, just to be thorough? There was a pause, and Olivia could imagine Ethan's expression, that slight narrowing of his eyes he got when he was displeased. I do mind, actually, he said finally. Got no reason to have strangers poking through my things. Now, Sawyer, another voice cut in, no need to be difficult, we're just doing our job. And I'm just protecting my privacy, Ethan countered. You've got no warrant, no authority out here. So unless you want trouble, I suggest you move along. The tension in the air was palpable even from inside the cabin. Olivia's finger hovered near the trigger of the rifle, though she knew using it would only make things worse. Finally, Wilson spoke again. All right, Sawyer, have it your way. But if you do see anything, the reward money's good. I'll keep that in mind, Ethan said dryly. Olivia watched through the window as the three men mounted their horses and rode away. Only when they were specks on the horizon did Ethan approach the cabin, knocking in a pattern they had established. 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. She opened the door, the rifle still in her hands, her face pale with fear. They're looking for me, I know. Ethan took the rifle from her gently. But they won't find you here, I won't let them. That night, after a quiet dinner, Ethan sat cleaning his guns while Olivia paced the cabin. I should leave, she said suddenly. It's not fair to put you in danger. Ethan looked up, his expression hard. And go where? Tucker's men are scouring every town, every trail. I could go north, maybe to Colorado alone, with winter coming. Ethan shook his head. That's a death sentence, Olivia. So is staying here, she cried, frustration boiling over. Those men today, they'll come back. Or others will, and if they find me, they'll kill you too. Ethan set aside his cleaning cloth and stood, crossing the room to stand before her. Listen to me. Tucker wants you because you're a witness to murder, yes, but also because without you, he can claim your father's land easily. The deed would pass to you as next of kin. If you run, if you disappear, you're playing right into his hands. But what choice do I have? Olivia asked, her voice breaking. We fight, Ethan said simply. We find proof of what Tucker did and bring him to justice. How? A grim smile touched Ethan's lips. I've been thinking about that. Tucker's got a man, Jeb Miller. He does the dirty work. If anyone knows the truth about your father's death, it's him, and Miller's got a weakness for whiskey and cards. Understanding dawned on Olivia's face. You're going to try to get him to talk. Not try, Ethan corrected. Succeed, but I'll need a few days to set it up. In the meantime, you stay here, stay hidden. Olivia wanted to argue further, to insist that she couldn't hide forever, but the determination in Ethan's eyes stopped her. This was personal for him too, a chance to avenge his friend as well as her father. Be careful, she said instead. Tucker's men are dangerous. Something softened in Ethan's expression. He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing gently against her cheek, now yellow-green as the bruise healed. So am I. The touch sent a jolt through Olivia, a warmth that spread from her cheek down to her toes. For a moment they stood there, eyes locked, the air between them charged with something neither was ready to name. Then Ethan stepped back, clearing his throat. Get some rest. Tomorrow, I'll teach you more about using that rifle just in case. 3 days later, Ethan rode out at dawn, dressed in his best shirt and with his hair slicked back with water. I'll be in Sweetwater, he told Olivia. There's a saloon there where Miller likes to drink and play cards. With luck, I'll be back by tomorrow. And if you're not, Olivia couldn't help asking. Ethan's expression grew serious. If I'm not back in 2 days, take the mare and ride northeast. There's a ranch about 20 miles that way owned by a man named Harris. Tell him what happened, he'll help you. The thought of Ethan not returning made Olivia's chest tighten painfully. In the short time she'd known him, he'd become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Be safe, she said, fighting the urge to reach for him. Ethan nodded once, then mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Olivia tried to occupy herself with chores, with reading, with anything that would keep her mind off the dangers Ethan might be facing. She jumped at every sound, half expecting Tucker's men to burst through the door at any moment. When night fell, she sat by the window, watching the dark landscape, straining for any sign of Ethan's return. But the night remained still and silent, and eventually exhaustion claimed her. She woke with a start, disoriented to find herself slumped in the chair by the window. Early morning light filtered through the glass, revealing an empty yard. No Ethan. Fear gnawed at her stomach, but she forced herself to be practical. It was early yet. He had said he might not return until today. There was no reason to panic. She went about her morning routine, though her movements were mechanical, her mind elsewhere. By midday, her nerves were frayed to breaking point. By late afternoon, she had begun to consider what she would need to pack for the journey to the Harris Ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in vivid orange and purple when she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Grabbing the rifle, Olivia positioned herself by the window, her heart in her throat. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Ethan's silhouette. She flung open the door and rushed onto the porch, only to stop short at the sight of him. His face was bruised, a cut above his eye crusted with dried blood, and he rode with one arm held stiffly against his side. "What happened?" she gasped as he dismounted slowly, clearly in pain. "Miller wasn't alone," Ethan said grimly, leading his horse toward the corral. "Had two of Tucker's other men with him. They didn't take kindly to my questions." Olivia helped him unsaddle the horse, noting how he winced with every movement. "Are you hurt badly?" "Just bruised," he said, though she didn't believe him. "Got what I came for, though." Inside the cabin, Olivia insisted on examining his injuries. A large purple bruise spread across his ribs, but nothing seemed broken. The cut above his eye was superficial. As she cleaned the wound, her fingers trembling slightly, Ethan told her what he had learned. "Miller was drunk enough to brag," he said. "Admitted to being there when your father was killed, said Tucker's planning to use forged documents to claim the land, saying your father sold it to him before his death." Olivia's hand stilled. "Can he do that?" "Not if we can prove the forgery." "And not if we can prove he had your father murdered." Ethan's eyes met hers. "Miller mentioned something else too, something about a letter your father had evidence of some kind against Tucker, said they looked for it but couldn't find it." Olivia frowned. "A letter?" "I don't know anything about that." "Think, Olivia, did your father ever mention anything, any document that might be valuable?" She shook her head slowly, then stopped. "Wait. A few days before it happened, he was acting strangely, secretive. I caught him hiding something in his Bible. When I asked about it, he said it was insurance in case anything happened to him." Hope sparked in Ethan's eyes. "That could be it. Where would the Bible be now? At the house, I suppose, unless they burned it." A terrible thought occurred to her. "Ethan, if the letter exists and if Tucker finds it, then we need to find it first," Ethan finished for her. "Tomorrow night we'll go back to your ranch." The plan was simple but dangerous. They would wait until dark, ride to the Garrett Ranch, search for the Bible and the letter, and be gone before anyone knew they were there. If the letter contained what they hoped evidence of Tucker's crimes, they would take it straight to the federal marshal in Tucson, bypassing the corrupt local sheriff. As they prepared for the journey the next evening, tension hung in the air between them. Both knew the risks they were taking. If caught, Ethan would likely be killed, and Olivia would face a sham trial for her father's murder. They rode in silence, the only sound the steady rhythm of their horses' hooves against the packed earth. The moon was just a sliver in the sky, providing barely enough light to see by, which suited their purposes perfectly. As they approached the Garrett Ranch, Olivia felt a lump form in her throat. The familiar silhouette of the house, the barn where she had hidden that terrible day, the corral where her father's horses had once grazed, it all looked peaceful in the moonlight, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. They tethered their horses in a small copse of trees a short distance from the house, approaching on foot with weapons drawn. The house stood dark and silent, no signs of occupation. "Stay close," Ethan whispered as they crept onto the porch. The door wasn't locked. There was little need for locks in such a remote location, especially for an apparently abandoned property. Inside, the house was just as Olivia had left it, though a layer of dust had settled over everything. She led Ethan to her father's bedroom, where she knew he kept his Bible. The book wasn't on the bedside table where it usually sat. Panic flickered in Olivia's chest as she searched the room, opening drawers, looking under the bed. "It's not here," she whispered, despair creeping into her voice. Ethan placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Think, where else might he have put it?" Olivia closed her eyes, trying to recall her father's movements in those last days. "The floorboard," she said suddenly, eyes flying open. "There's a loose floorboard in the sitting room. He used to hide small valuables there." They hurried to the sitting room, and Olivia knelt by the fireplace, running her fingers along the wooden planks until she found the one that shifted slightly under pressure. Prying it up, she reached into the dark space beneath. Her fingers closed around the familiar leather binding of the Bible. "I found it," she whispered triumphantly, pulling the book from its hiding place. They huddled together near the window, where the faint moonlight allowed them to see as Olivia carefully leafed through the pages. Between the book of Psalms and Proverbs, she found an envelope sealed and addressed to the federal marshal. "This is it," she breathed, her heart racing with hope and fear. But before she could open it, a sound from outside froze her blood. Horses approaching. Many of them. Ethan was at the window in an instant. "Tucker's men," he hissed. "At least 5 of them. They must have been watching the place." "What do we do?" Olivia clutched the Bible and letter to her chest, terror washing over her. Ethan's mind worked quickly. "The back door. We'll make for the trees behind the barn, if we can reach our horses." They slipped out the back of the house just as the riders reached the front. Moving as quietly as possible, they crept toward the barn, using its bulk to shield them from view. But luck wasn't on their side. A figure emerged from the barn, a lantern in hand. "Hey," the man shouted, spotting them immediately. "Over here, they're behind the barn." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Run," he ordered, pushing Olivia ahead of him as he turned and fired his revolver toward the lantern. The shot hit its mark, plunging the area into darkness as glass shattered and oil ignited briefly before dying out. They ran for the trees, the shouts and curses of Tucker's men following them. A bullet whizzed past Olivia's ear, close enough that she felt the air disturbed by its passage. Another thudded into a tree trunk just ahead. When they reached their horses, Ethan practically threw Olivia onto her mare's back. "Ride east," he commanded, mounting his own horse. "Don't stop for anything." They galloped into the night, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them as their horses ate up the distance. Ethan led them on a winding path, crossing a shallow stream several times to confuse their trail, taking them through dense underbrush that would slow any followers. It was nearly dawn when they finally stopped, their horses lathered and breathing hard. They had reached a series of rocky outcroppings that provided some shelter and a vantage point to watch for pursuit. "I think we lost them," Ethan said, scanning the horizon. "For now." Olivia's hands were shaking as she pulled the envelope from the Bible. "Should we open it?" Ethan nodded. "We need to know what we're risking our lives for." The letter inside was written in her father's neat hand. As Olivia read it aloud, her voice grew stronger with each word. It detailed a meeting where Tucker had openly discussed his plan to acquire the land along the railroad route, by any means necessary. It named witnesses to threats Tucker had made, documented bribes to officials, and mentioned a previous murder Tucker had ordered, that of a rancher named Tom Reynolds. Ethan's face was grim but satisfied as she finished reading. "This is it. This is what we need to bring him down." "But how do we get it to the marshal? Tucker's men will be watching every road, every town." "Not every road," Ethan said thoughtfully. "There's a back trail through the mountains. It's difficult terrain, but if we can make it through, we can reach Tucson in 3 days without passing through any towns where Tucker has influence. It was a desperate plan, but it was their only hope. They rested through the day, hidden among the rocks, and set out again at dusk, heading southwest toward the mountains that separated them from Tucson and Justice. The journey was grueling. The trail, little more than a game path in places, wound through steep, rocky terrain. They had to lead the horses on foot for much of it, and progress was painfully slow. Water was scarce, food even more so. By the end of the second day, both were exhausted, their clothes torn, their bodies battered by the unforgiving landscape. But as the sun rose on the third day, they crested a ridge and saw the sprawl of Tucson in the distance, the largest settlement in the Arizona Territory and home to the federal marshal's office. "We made it," Olivia said, a mix of disbelief and relief in her voice. Ethan's smile was weary but genuine. "Not quite yet. Let's get down there and finish this." They approached the town cautiously, alert for any sign of Tucker's men. But the streets were busy with the normal traffic of a prosperous frontier town, and they blended in as just another pair of dusty travelers. The marshal's office was a solid adobe building near the center of town. Marshal James Parker, a tall, lean man with a salt and pepper beard, listened to their story with growing concern, reading the letter carefully when they presented it. "This is serious business," he said finally, looking up at them. "Tucker's a powerful man in these parts. But if what this letter says is true, and I have no reason to doubt it, then he's also a murderer and a criminal." "It's all true," Olivia said fervently. "My father wouldn't lie." Parker nodded slowly. "I believe you, Miss Garrett, but we'll need to move carefully. Tucker has friends in high places." He thought for a moment. "I'll send a telegram to the governor. In the meantime, you two will stay here under my protection." For the first time in weeks, Olivia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They weren't safe yet, but they were no longer alone in their fight. Parker installed them in rooms above the general store, owned by a widow named Mrs. Abernathy, who was apparently an old friend of the marshal's. While they waited for a response from the governor, Ethan and Olivia rarely left their temporary sanctuary, all too aware that Tucker's reach was long. On the fourth day, Parker brought news. "Governor's sending a judge," he announced. "Special session of the territorial court day after tomorrow. In the meantime, I've arrested Jeb Miller on suspicion of murder." "What about Tucker?" Ethan asked. Parker's expression darkened. "He's holed up at his ranch with a small army of hired guns. Claims he's innocent of any wrongdoing, says the letter is a forgery." He paused. "But Miller's singing like a canary now that he's facing the gallows." "Between his testimony and your father's letter, Miss Garrett, I think we've got enough to see Tucker hang." The day of the hearing dawned clear and hot. Olivia dressed in clothes Mrs. Abernathy had provided, a simple blue dress that was slightly too large but clean and respectable. Ethan wore his one good shirt and had trimmed his beard for the occasion. As they walked to the courthouse, Ethan placed a protective hand at the small of Olivia's back. The touch was casual but reassuring, and she found herself leaning into it slightly. "Whatever happens today," Ethan said quietly, "I want you to know that I—" He hesitated, seemingly at a loss for words. Olivia looked up at him, at this man who had risked everything to help her, who had become so important to her in such a short time. "I know," she said softly. "Me too." The courthouse was packed. Word had spread about the case against Jonas Tucker, and it seemed the entire town had turned out to witness it. Tucker himself sat at the front, flanked by his lawyer and several of his men. He was a big man with a florid face and small, hard eyes that fixed on Olivia with naked hatred when she entered. The proceedings began with the reading of the charges: 2 counts of murder, multiple counts of fraud, bribery, and intimidation. Tucker pleaded not guilty to all charges, his voice booming through the courtroom. Olivia was called to testify first. Her voice shook initially as she recounted the events of that terrible day, hiding in the barn, seeing Tucker's men shoot her father, fleeing for her life. But as she continued, Her resolve strengthened, and by the end, she was speaking clearly and confidently. Jeb Miller testified next, having agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. He confirmed everything in Olivia's testimony and added damning details about other crimes Tucker had ordered, including the murder of Tom Reynolds. Throughout it all, Ethan sat in the front row, his steady presence giving Olivia strength. When it was his turn to speak, he told of finding Olivia at his door, bruised and terrified, and of their subsequent quest for justice. The judge, a stern older man named Harmon, listened to it all with an impassive expression. When the last witness had spoken and the lawyers had made their final arguments, he called for order in the now buzzing courtroom. "Having heard the evidence presented," Judge Harmon said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "I find sufficient cause to bind over Jonas Tucker for trial on all charges. He will be held without bail until that time." A roar went up from the crowd. Tucker leaped to his feet, face contorted with rage. "This is a farce," he shouted. "That girl is a liar. Sawyer has a vendetta against me. Remove the prisoner," the judge ordered, unruffled by the outburst. As the marshal's deputies moved to take Tucker into custody, one of his men suddenly drew a gun. Chaos erupted. Women screamed, men dove for cover, and the sharp crack of gunfire filled the air. Ethan grabbed Olivia, pulling her down behind a bench. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his own weapon. The exchange of gunfire was brief but intense. When it ended, 2 of Tucker's men lay dead along with 1 deputy. Tucker himself had a bullet in his shoulder but was very much alive as he was dragged, cursing and struggling, from the courthouse. "Are you hurt?" Ethan asked Olivia, his eyes scanning her for injuries. She shook her head, too shocked to speak. It was over. Tucker was going to face justice for his crimes. Her father would be avenged later that evening as they sat in the quiet of Mrs. Abernathy's parlor. The events of the day seemed almost dreamlike. Marshal Parker had stopped by to inform them that Tucker was securely locked in the jail, his wound treated, and that the judge had set a trial date for the following month. "What will you do now?" Ethan asked Olivia when they were alone again. It was a question she had been pondering herself. With Tucker arrested and her name cleared, she could return to her father's ranch, but the thought held little appeal. Too many painful memories lingered there. "I don't know," she admitted. "Sell the ranch, perhaps, start fresh somewhere else." Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's sensible." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words. Olivia found herself studying the planes of Ethan's face, committing them to memory. The thought of never seeing him again after everything they'd been through was unexpectedly painful. "And you?" she asked finally. "Will you go back to your cabin?" "I suppose so," Ethan said, though he didn't sound convinced. "It's home." Another silence, longer this time. Then, gathering her courage, Olivia spoke the words that had been building in her heart. "You could come with me, or I could go with you. Back to your cabin, I mean." Ethan's head snapped up, surprise evident in his expression. "Olivia." "I know it sounds impulsive," she rushed on, "but these past weeks, I've never felt so alive, so real as I do when I'm with you. Even in danger, even running for our lives, I felt whole." A slow smile spread across Ethan's face, transforming it completely. "I was thinking the same thing," he admitted, "but I didn't want to presume. You're young, educated. You could have a life in a proper town with proper society." Olivia shook her head firmly. "That's not what I want. I want a life that's real. I want." She hesitated, then finished simply, "I want you." Ethan crossed the room in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. "Are you sure? My cabin is small, the work is hard, and I'm not an easy man to live with." "I'm sure," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The month that followed was busy with preparations. Tucker's trial proceeded swiftly, resulting in a guilty verdict on all counts and a sentence of hanging. With justice served, Olivia arranged to sell her father's ranch to a young couple from the East, using part of the money to pay off the small mortgage, and setting the rest aside for her future with Ethan. They were married in a simple ceremony at the small church in Tucson, with Marshall Parker giving the bride away and Mrs. Abernathy shedding happy tears in the front pew. The next day, they set out for Ethan's cabin, now to be their shared home. As they rode, Olivia reflected on the strange, twisting path that had brought her to this moment. The terrible loss of her father, the desperate flight, the bruises that had now faded completely, all of it had led her to Ethan, to a love she had never imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, noticing her pensive expression. Olivia smiled, reaching across to take his hand. "About the first night I came to your door, about what you said to me." Ethan's brow furrowed slightly. "What did I say?" "You told me my face was bruised from running," she said softly. "And you promised I would heal where no one could touch me." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "And did you?" "Heal? Yes," Olivia said, squeezing his hand, "in all the ways that matter." They rode on toward home, toward their future together. Behind them lay grief and danger and justice served. Ahead lay a life built with their own hands in a place where they could both heal, where they could both be free. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall, and fall to winter. The cabin, once so sparse and bachelor-like, gradually took on the touches of a true home under Olivia's care. Curtains adorned the windows, colorful quilts brightened the bed, and the scent of baking bread often filled the air. Ethan, for his part, added onto the cabin, building a proper bedroom and expanding the main living area. Together they worked the land, increased his small herd of cattle, and began to prosper in their modest way. News came occasionally from Douglas and Tucson. Tucker had been hanged, his empire dismantled, his ill-gotten lands returned to their rightful owners or sold to honest settlers. Marshall Parker wrote that the territory was changing rapidly, with the railroad bringing new people, new opportunities, and hopefully a more civilized brand of justice. On a crisp morning in their second winter together, as snow blanketed the land around their cabin, Olivia placed Ethan's hand on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she told him, her eyes shining with joy. Ethan's expression transformed from shock to wonder to utter happiness in the space of a heartbeat. He gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which to him she was. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." Their son, James Thomas Sawyer, was born the following summer, a healthy, strong boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, he was joined by a sister, Elizabeth Grace. Life wasn't always easy. There were droughts and blizzards, illness and hardship. But there was also joy, deep and abiding, in the home they had built together, in the family they had created, in the love that had blossomed from the most unlikely of beginnings. On the 5th anniversary of the day they met, Ethan presented Olivia with a gift, a small wooden box he had carved himself. Inside was a silver locket containing miniature portraits of their children. "It's beautiful," Olivia said, tears welling in her eyes as Ethan fastened it around her neck. "Not as beautiful as you," he replied, his voice still holding the same awe it had the first time he'd told her he loved her. As they stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard, Olivia was struck anew by how completely her life had transformed. From that desperate, bruised young woman fleeing for her life to this, a wife, a mother, a woman who knew her own strength and worth. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Ethan. "Taking in a stranger that night, risking everything?" Ethan looked at her, his expression serious. "Not for a single moment," he said. "Meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me, Olivia Sawyer." She leaned into his embrace, secure in the knowledge that they had built something rare and precious together, a life of purpose, of meaning, of deep and abiding love. A healing that went far beyond the physical, touching the very depths of their souls. And as the sun set over their land, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Olivia knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the arms of the man who had promised her healing and given her so much more.